Hi everybody, my name is Claire Rother and I am on a mission to educate and empower you to create deep and lasting change in your life. So a little bit about me. I am a yoga and mindfulness teacher. I have a master's degree in psychology where I specialised in the use of mindfulness. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in herbal medicine and postgraduate training in something called psychoneuroimmunology, which is a long fancy word for mind-body medicine. I've worked as a research assistant and an assistant psychologist, and these videos I am sharing my knowledge with you. It's all about the art and the science of personal transformation. So we're going to get a bit geeky sometimes. We're going to cover lots of different things. And today we are talking about brain integration. So what the heck is that and why am I bothered? Well, before we start, if you watched my video from last week, that would be helpful. It's not necessary, it's a good precursor to this one. At the end of the talk from last week, I touched on something called brain integration, and I didn't go into it in detail because that's what I wanted to do this week. So what is brain integration? Well, there are different types of integration. What we're talking about today is vertical integration, and essentially when the brain is integrated, it means that it can function optimally because there is good communication between the different parts of the brain. So there is the flow of energy and information. And if we're talking about vertical integration, what that means is integration on a vertical axis. So our nervous system is distributed vertically. Brain, body, so in particular the different parts of the brain, which I talked about last week, that do different things. So your cortex, your limbic system, your brainstem and your cerebellum, and then your spinal cord and the body. So the body is really just an extension of our brain. It just doesn't have a skull around it. So vertical integration is when these different parts of the brain and the body can communicate well with each other, when there is the healthy optimal flow of energy and information between these parts. So when we have good vertical integration, there is the emergence of new qualities, and these include coherence, access to our intuition, being embodied. They include self-regulation, resilience, and response flexibility, so not being chaotic or rigid. And there are different reasons why we might lack this vertical integration. So the main ones are trauma and mental illness. So just to point out, we tend to think of trauma as being a very big word. We probably think of things like really acute situations, big life events, like a bereavement or something. And of course, that's true, can be true. But trauma can also be, for instance, growing up in a household where your emotions were never noticed and never validated. So it's a lot more prevalent than I think we might automatically think when we hear that word. So the symptoms of lacking this vertical integration, symptoms of lacking this healthy communication between different parts of the brain and the body, are that we feel cut off from our intuition, that we are disembodied, so we're not very aware or in tune with our emotions or the sensations, the feelings in the body. We can be at the mercy of our primitive reactions to things, so we might easily get triggered and move into more primitive emotions like anger, defensiveness, jealousy, greed, obsession, and that we lack the ability to self-regulate. So we're not able to manage and monitor our emotions. How can we increase our capacity for vertical integration, which is really to ask the question, how can we learn to self-regulate better? How can we learn to be more in touch with our intuition? How can we learn to decide who we want to be in the world and show up as that person and not be at the mercy of our primitive reactions to things? So the key to answering this question is working with our capacity to consciously direct where we place our attention. And oh my God, that is just huge. I mean, I am all about that. If you want to change anything about yourself and your life, you gotta work with that. consciously being able to decide where you give your attention, and which is to really give your energy to something. So deciding what you're giving your energy and your attention to, rather than it just being this unconscious process. So when we strengthen that ability, what we're really talking about is working with our prefrontal cortex. Again, big word, I spoke about it last week. It's a part of our brain, very new in our evolution. It's like the outer layer of the brain at the very front. And there is a specific part of this that governs our ability to self-direct our attention. So it's a bit like a muscle. You know, if you want to get good abs, you've got to train them. And if you want to get good at consciously noticing, what am I giving my attention to? Because, by the way, 95% of the time you're unconscious of that. If you want to get conscious of that, you need to work with this skill. And when you do that, you will strengthen that part of your brain and you get better at it. So when we work with our prefrontal cortex and when we strengthen this conscious ability to direct our attention to things that we're choosing, we also get very integrative in terms of our brain. So our frontal cortex is literally one brain cell away from the lower parts of the brain beneath it. So that's our limbic system, our kind of emotional center, and our brainstem, which is our more primitive part of our brain. So these tend to function very unconsciously and very reflexively, very, very quickly. And most of the time we're unconscious of the things that are perhaps happening in those parts of our brain. But when we work with becoming more conscious, strengthening our ability to notice and to self-direct our attention, we make better linkages between our prefrontal cortex and those lower parts of the brain, which is really that we are able to make the unconscious conscious. And also when we do that, we can work with our ability to consciously direct our attention down into our body. So very often we live just up here. My mum calls it being a lollipop on a stick. But we can be very disembodied for survival reasons, which can be an adaptive response at times. We shut off from our emotions, we shut off from the sensations and feelings in the body. But unless we reopen that channel, unless we get that information flowing again from body to lower parts of the brain to higher parts of the brain, then our ability to self-regulate, which is really a key part of that, is being able to tune into what you're feeling in the moment and notice how that's affecting you. We're not going to be able to do that unless we work with being present, attentive to the feelings, sensations, emotions in the body. So I work with this a lot in yoga. So we can do it with mindful movement, paying attention to the sensations in the body, moving out of thinking about the body to feeling, being in the body. And also mindfulness and meditation practices strengthen this. So the biggest thing that I would say, the crux of this, if you want to learn to better self-regulate, to be the person you want to be, to align your actions with your intentions, then you need to work on your ability to self-direct your attention, which is really strengthening your prefrontal cortex and the way that that connects and integrates to the rest of the brain and the body. So there'll be much more info generally around some of these topics, but if you have any questions or you've got any comments, then leave them below and I will see you next week.